It was a peaceful morning in the village of Umuchi, where the sun rose lazily over the hills, casting a warm glow on the thatched roofs and dusty pathways. The village was alive with the sounds of roosters crowing, women pounding yam, and children laughing as they ran barefoot through the fields. Life in Umuchi was simple, but beneath the surface, shadows lurked in one family, a family whose dark secrets would soon come to light. In the heart of the village lived Nkem, a strikingly beautiful woman with sharp features and a presence that commanded attention wherever she went. She was married to Nkem, a hard-working and kind-hearted farmer. Together, they had a son named Obinna, a young man known for his intelligence and charm. The villagers often joked that Obinna was the kind of man every mother would want for her daughter. However, Nkem had no intention of letting her son go. She adored Obinna, but her love for him was unlike the love of any other mother. It was possessive, suffocating, and filled with jealousy. Whenever young women in the village showed interest in Obinna, Nkem's sharp tongue would drive them away. "He's too good for them," she would mutter to herself. But in truth, her jealousy stemmed from something darker, something she dared not admit, even to herself. Obinna, on the other hand, longed for freedom. He was tired of his mother's constant interference and wanted to marry Amora, a kind and beautiful girl from the neighboring village. Amora was everything he had ever dreamed of: gentle, hardworking, and full of laughter. But Nkem hated Amora with a passion. She accused the girl of trying to steal her son away and forbade Obinna from seeing her. One fateful evening, Obinna confronted his mother. "Mema," he began, his voice trembling with frustration. "I love Amora, and I want to marry her. Why can't you be happy for me?" Nkem's eyes narrowed as she stepped closer to him. "You don't need her," she hissed. "You have me. Am I not enough?" Obinna's heart sank. He couldn't understand why his mother was acting this way. It was unnatural, wrong even. But he didn't know how to fight her. As the days turned into weeks, Nkem's obsession grew worse. She began to isolate Obinna, keeping him close to her at all times. She would cook his favorite meals, stroke his hair, and tell him stories of how they didn't need anyone else but each other. Obinna felt trapped, but he was too ashamed to speak out. Then one day, everything changed. Nkem, who had always been a quiet and observant man, began to notice the strange dynamic between his wife and son. He couldn't ignore the tension that seemed to fill the air whenever they were together. Determined to uncover the truth, he decided to confront Obinna. Late one night, as the moon cast long shadows across the village, Nkem found Obinna sitting alone under the iroko tree. "My son," Nkem began gently, "I see the pain in your eyes. What is troubling you?" Tears welled up in Obinna's eyes as he looked at his father. "Papa," he whispered, "I can't hold it in anymore. Mema, she doesn't want me to marry Amora. She says I don't need anyone else but her." Nkem's brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean, my son? A mother's love should never hold you back." Obinna hesitated, but the weight of his secret was too heavy to bear. He confessed everything: Nkem's possessiveness, her jealousy, and the forbidden relationship that had begun to spiral out of control. Nkem was horrified. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. His wife, the woman he had loved and trusted, had betrayed him in the worst way imaginable. He knew he had to act quickly before the situation escalated further. The next morning, Nkem called a meeting with the village elders. Under the shade of the ancient iroko tree, he revealed the dark secret that had been tearing his family apart. The villagers gasped in shock, their faces etched with disbelief and anger. Nkem, when confronted, tried to deny everything. But the evidence was clear, and the elders decided that she and Obinna had to face the consequences of their actions. They were banished to the evil forest, a place feared by all for its eerie silence and tales of wandering spirits. As Nkem and Obinna walked into the dense forest, the weight of their choices hung heavy in the air. They were left to live with their regret, far from the village and the people they had hurt. As the days turned into weeks, the village of Umuchi slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Yet, the memory of the shocking events surrounding Nkem and Obinna lingered in the minds of the people. Parents used the tale as a warning to their children, while others whispered about the eerie fate of those banished to the evil forest. Nkem, however, struggled to move forward. The betrayal of his wife and the banishment of his only son had left a deep wound in his heart. He spent many nights staring at the stars, wondering where he had gone wrong and whether Obinna had truly been lost to the darkness of his mother's influence. Meanwhile, deep within the evil forest, Nkem and Obinna began to understand the weight of their exile. The forest was a terrifying place, thick with shadows, strange noises, and the constant feeling of being watched. The air was heavy, and the tall trees seemed to stretch endlessly, blotting out the sunlight. At first, Nkem tried to act as though nothing had changed. She clung to Obinna, whispering that they didn't need anyone else but each other. "This forest will be our home," she said, her voice trembling with false confidence. "We'll build a new life here, just you and me." But Obinna was no longer the boy who had been too afraid to defy his mother. The isolation and the harshness of their new reality had begun to open his eyes. He saw Nkem not as the protective mother he once revered, but as a woman consumed by her own selfish desires. One night, as they huddled together under a makeshift shelter of leaves and branches, Obinna finally confronted her. "Mama," he said, his voice firm, "this isn't right. What we did, what you made me do, it wasn't love. It was wrong." Nkem's eyes widened in shock. "How can you say that?" she demanded, her voice cracking. "I gave you everything. I protected you from those who wanted to take you away from me." "No, Mama," Obinna replied, shaking his head. "You didn't protect me. You trapped me. You were afraid of losing me, and in your fear, you destroyed everything we had." For the first time, Nkem was silent. Obinna's words pierced through her defenses, forcing her to confront the truth she had long buried. As the days passed, the bond between mother and son began to unravel. Obinna started to distance himself, wandering deeper into the forest in search of food and answers. It was during one of these wanderings that he stumbled upon a strange old man sitting by a small fire. The man, dressed in tattered robes, seemed to radiate a calm wisdom that was out of place in the ominous forest. "Who are you?" Obinna asked cautiously, keeping his distance. The old man looked up, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of kindness and curiosity. "I am Anayo," he said simply. "And you, young man, are not meant to be here." Obinna hesitated, unsure of whether to trust the stranger. But something about Anayo's presence made him feel at ease. Slowly, he sat down by the fire and told the old man everything: his mother's possessiveness, their forbidden relationship, and their banishment to the forest. Anayo listened without interrupting, his face expressionless. When Obinna finished, the old man nodded thoughtfully. "The path you've walked is a dark one," he said. "But it is not too late to find redemption. You must free yourself from your mother's hold and seek forgiveness, not just from your father and your village, but from yourself." "How?" Obinna asked, his voice tinged with desperation. "You must leave this forest and return to Umuchi," Anayo replied. "Face the people you have wronged and accept whatever punishment they deem fit. Only then can you truly be free." Obinna's heart raced at the thought. Returning to the village seemed impossible. The shame, the anger of the villagers, how could he face it all? But Anayo's words stayed with him. That night, as he sat by the fire with Nkem, he made a decision. "Mema," he said, his voice steady, "I'm leaving the forest. I'm going back to Umuchi to make things right." Nkem's eyes filled with fear and anger. "You can't leave me," she cried. "We're all we have left." "No, Mema," Obinna replied firmly. "You have to face your own demons. I can't let you drag me down anymore." With that, Obinna gathered what little he had and left the forest. Nkem's cries echoed behind him, but he didn't look back. When Obinna returned to Umuchi, the villagers were stunned. Many were furious, demanding that he be punished further for breaking the terms of his banishment. But others saw the pain and remorse in his eyes and urged the elders to hear his plea. Standing before the council of elders, Obinna bowed his head. "I have come to ask for forgiveness," he said. "What I did was wrong, and I take full responsibility for my actions. I am ready to accept whatever punishment you see fit." The elders deliberated long into the night. Finally, they decided that Obinna would be allowed to stay in the village, but only if he dedicated his life to serving the community. He would work to rebuild trust and prove that he had truly changed. Obinna accepted their judgment without hesitation. As the years passed in Umuchi, the tale of Nkem and Obinna became a story often whispered during moonlit nights around the fire. The villagers told it to their children as a warning, a reminder of how love, when twisted by selfishness and fear, could destroy even the strongest bonds. Yet, for Obinna, the story was not just a warning, it was a path to redemption. Obinna dedicated himself fully to serving the community. He worked tirelessly in the fields, helped the elders with repairs, and spent time mentoring younger boys in the village, sharing his story to teach them the value of making the right choices. The pain of his past never left him, but it became a source of strength, a reminder that he could rebuild his life through honesty and integrity. One day, while working on the village's water well, Obinna noticed a familiar figure walking toward him. It was Amora, the woman he had once dreamed of marrying. She had grown more beautiful with time, her soft smile now accompanied by an air of wisdom and grace. Amora approached cautiously, unsure of how to address the man who had disappeared from her life under such dark circumstances. "Obinna," she said softly, "it's been a long time." Obinna turned, his heart racing. "Amora," he replied, his voice filled with a mixture of joy and guilt. "I never thought I'd see you again." The two stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the past heavy between them. Finally, Amora spoke. "I've heard of all the good you've been doing for the village. They say you've changed." "I've tried," Obinna said, his eyes downcast. "I've made many mistakes, Amora. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that I'm sorry for everything." Amora studied him for a moment before giving a small nod. "It takes courage to admit your wrongs and work to make things right. I see that in you, Obinna. Perhaps time can heal what was broken." Her words sparked a hope in Obinna that he hadn't felt in years. Though he didn't dare to dream of rekindling their relationship, her forgiveness was a gift he cherished deeply. Meanwhile, deep in the evil forest, Nkem's life had taken a darker turn. The forest, with its eerie silence and creeping shadows, had become her prison. She spent her days wandering aimlessly, haunted by the choices that had led her there. Her beauty faded, replaced by the weariness of regret and the weight of isolation. One fateful night, as the moon shone dimly through the thick canopy of trees, Nkem stumbled upon a clearing. In the center stood the old man Anayo, the same wise figure who had guided Obinna. "What do you want from me?" Nkem demanded, her voice rough and filled with bitterness. Anayo looked at her calmly, his eyes filled with an understanding that unnerved her. "You've spent years running from the truth, Nkem. It is time to face it." "I've lost everything," Nkem spat. "My husband, my son, my home, what truth could possibly make that right?" "The truth that love cannot be forced," Anayo said gently. "Your love for your son was poisoned by fear and control. Until you admit your faults and seek forgiveness, you will remain lost, not just in this forest, but within yourself." Nkem sank to her knees, the weight of Anayo's words crushing her spirit. For the first time in years, tears streamed down her face. She cried for the pain she had caused, the lives she had ruined, and the family she had lost. "Can I ever be forgiven?" she whispered. "That depends on you," Anayo replied. "But forgiveness begins with humility and the courage to change." The following morning, Nkem made the long journey out of the forest and back to Umuchi. When she arrived at the village gates, her appearance startled the villagers. She was unrecognizable, frail, weathered, and humbled by years of suffering. Word of her return spread quickly, and soon a crowd gathered. Nkem and Obinna stood at the front, their expressions a mixture of shock and apprehension. Nkem knelt before them, her head bowed. "I have no right to ask for your forgiveness," she said, her voice trembling. "But I am here to take responsibility for the pain I caused. I was blinded by my own fears, and in my selfishness, I hurt the people I loved most." For a moment, there was silence. Then Nkem stepped forward, his eyes softening. "Nkem," he said quietly, "your actions brought us great pain. But you were not the only one who suffered. We all carry the scars of those days." Obinna hesitated before stepping forward as well. "Mama," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I've spent years trying to move past what happened. I can't forget, but I can forgive. I just hope you've learned to forgive yourself too." The villagers, moved by the scene before them, murmured their approval. While Nkem would never regain her place in the family, she was allowed to stay in the village and live out her days in peace. She became a quiet, reflective figure, often seen tending to the community garden and offering advice to younger women about the dangers of letting fear and jealousy guide their actions. As for Obinna, his life slowly began to bloom again. With Amora by his side, he rebuilt his relationships and eventually started a family of his own. He became a respected leader in Umuchi, known for his wisdom, humility, and unwavering dedication to the community.
Please subscribe to our YouTube channel for more stories.